I lost power. Now, we were talking about that idea of Shylock embracing that idea of judgment and wanting to use logic in order to support it, citing the example of the slaves and how he has bought this pound of flesh just as much as slaves were bought by Christians. And that idea that he is doing as Christians have taught him, by Christian example, remember, is what he was talking about back in the Hath Not a Jew Eyes speech. So indeed, one of the things that we're having to examine is not just a Jewish idea here, but instead that whole shared vision of what constitutes justice and whether we can embrace the idea of justice in a world that sometimes doesn't seem to be as just as we'd like it to be. Indeed, one of the things that Shylock insists is that he represents that idea of justice. He actually says that in this speech when he says, I stand for judgment. Remember, it was Portia who said, I stand for sacrifice. That's a very different view of the nature of the world than the one that Shylock seems to be sharing. I stand for judgment. And indeed, when we see Portia and Shylock interact here, it's going to be in that idea of mercy up against that idea of law. And though we value, all of us value law, we value justice, we have to decide whether we value a law and justice more or less than we value the idea of mercy. And our problem may be that, of course, mercy is not a particularly logical thing. As a matter of fact, mercy is totally against the concept of logic. It asks us to do things that we know perfectly well we don't want to do. Yet that's what Portia is going to ask Shylock to do in the course of this justice scene, in the course of the trial scene, and we're in Act 4, Scene 1. She is going to explain this nature of mercy and ask not only for Shylock to show mercy, but by extension for those Christians who supposedly should be embracing the idea of mercy, to wake up to the reality of what their Christianity should be, rather than relying upon that a world of commerce and law that is not exactly consistent with the values that this play wants to uphold. When we have Shylock insisting on judgment, and Antonio pretty much saying, well, of course, that's what is right, that's what everybody has to support, we have to have somebody who comes in from outside. We have to have Portia come in and actually talk about that idea of mercy. And that wonderful, wonderful mercy speech that she has is the key to the entire play. And this is Act 4, Scene 1, about line 182, and you really should read this speech several times. Portia has asked Antonio whether the bond is legitimate. He says, yes. Do you confess the bond? I do. And she then says, then must the Jew be merciful. She says that almost as if it is a claim of law, which of course it's not. And he points that out. On what compulsion must I? Tell me that. And she explains, the quality of mercy is not strained. You can't force mercy on anybody. Mercy is a state of mind. It's not an action. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes. It is mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crowned. His scepter shows the force of temporal power. That's law. The attributes to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. Again, law. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly powers doth show likest God when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice none of us should see salvation. Nobody deserves salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. And you should recognize, of course, what she's referencing. The Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And it's that reciprocity, that idea that you can be forgiven only if you are willing to forgive, that helps guide the rest of this scene. Because that is not a reasonable expectation, but it is the heart of Christian concepts of mercy. Now, the Christian concepts of mercy are not necessarily consistent with law. And indeed, when Shylock says, I crave the law, the penalty and forfeit of my bond, if this world is operating according to law, he's right. If this world is operating according to law, I'm sorry, we're all damned. We have to be hoping that maybe this world isn't particularly logical, that this world isn't particularly reflecting the ideas of judgment and law. Luckily, we have a Portia here who is going to try to lead us toward that idea of mercy. Actually, she tries to lead Shylock toward the idea of mercy and doesn't have a particularly successful operation. She does keep telling him that he needs to show mercy, or that he should show mercy. Asks him to, in that first, right before the mercy speech, the Jew must be merciful. Offers that he should take thrice his money and let her tear the bond. He says, no. When it's paid according to the tenure, okay, I will do it. Okay, but only when I've gotten the bond that I have expected. I charge you by the law, is what Shylock says. So he's already had 2 chances here to back off. Portia gives him a third one. Says, okay, at the very least, what you can do is maybe staunch the blood once you cut into his flesh. And he says, no, not unless it's actually specifically written in bond. And that decision to adhere to the letter of the law is what ends up justifying what Portia does in adhering to the letter of the law. In doing that, she is following the strictures of the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And if Shylock has refused to be willing to show any mercy, the mercy he receives is exactly what he gave, the letter of the law. And so she keeps inviting him to show that mercy. He doesn't. And indeed, when he finally does insist upon the law, she keeps reiterating the fact that that's what he's getting. A pound of flesh, the same merchant's flesh is thine, the court awards it, and the law doth give it. And Shylock, most rightful judge, and you must cut this flesh from off his breast. The law allows it, and the court awards it. Okay, and as you know, everything's going to happen on the third time. And when he's just about to do it, she says, tarry a little, there's something else. This bond doth give thee here no jot of blood. Again, insisting on that letter of the bond. And then when he thinks about that, he does say, Shylock does say, is that the law? And she points out, that's what you asked for. Thyself shall see the act. This is it. Thou shalt have justice more than thou desirest. The effect of justice is to get justice. An eye for an eye. As you know, the old saying, everybody ends up blind. Now, according to that pattern, it would seem that what Portia is doing is perpetuating the same error that Shylock makes, the insistence upon the law. But do notice that there's actually 2 things going on here. Portia sets up a situation of education where Shylock has that opportunity to step up and learn about the idea of mercy. He elects not to do so. But after that example, she now puts the Christians into the same situation where they have to decide whether or not to show mercy. Now, they're perfectly justified in not doing so. The law does give them the right to confiscate everything that Shylock has, the right to put him to death. And what she does is suggest that what Shylock needs to do is beg mercy of the Duke. Now, before Shylock even speaks, well, Gratiano first says, no way, I'm going to let you just go hang yourself. I love Gratiano. The Duke says, I'm going to show you what the difference is between justice and mercy. I pardon thee thy life before thou askest it. And then actually also says, well, you can have your life. I'm not going to even take that. You don't even have to ask for it. Mercy there. But when he says, I'm going to take your money, Shylock points out that that's not exactly what you'd call merciful. Now take my life and all grant, pardon me, not that. You take my house when you do take the prop that doth sustain my house. You take my life when you take the means whereby I live. And here is where the test is for Antonio. Because Antonio is the one who understands what that means. He's just been through that, losing everything that he has. And our question is going to be, is he going to be the dog? Is he going to snap back? Or is he going to find some way to transcend the expectation and show something that's closer to mercy? And Antonio does forgive Shylock the monetary penalty. Says that he will give the funds back to Shylock as long as he's going to allow his daughter to have some of it. And he sets a second criteria, which is that Shylock has to presently become a Christian. Now, in a post-Holocaust world, it's very difficult for an audience to hear that and not feel creeped out, honestly. It seems horrid to expect this of Shylock, that he give up his world. But I want you to read the next passage that's going to come up. It's a short reading assignment, and react to it and see if, after reading that and thinking through the scene, how you react to that forced conversion of Shylock.